The galaxy was wide, full of many worlds and many voices. Some species lived in peace, some lived in constant fear, and some lived in endless struggle. But among them all, one name was always spoken with caution and respect: the Varkan. The Varkan came from a planet called Drethus Prime. It was a brutal place, true Deathworld. Storms of fire crossed the skies. Beasts larger than starships hunted the lands, and the ground itself shifted with violent quakes. To survive there, every creature needed strength, sharp claws, and endless hunger for life. The Varkan were born in that storm, shaped by it, hardened by it. Their bodies grew tall, their muscles dense, their bones stronger than steel. To many in the galaxy, the Varkan were the strongest warriors alive. Other species built cities and fleets, but the Varkan built themselves. They lived for combat, for trial, for showing dominance. Their voices were like thunder, and their eyes burned with the heat of their homeworld. No one dared to challenge them directly. Even the most advanced empires chose caution, trading carefully, never provoking their wrath. Yet the Varkan lived with a certain pride. For centuries, they believed themselves unmatched, the peak of life, the rulers of survival itself. But whispers traveled through the stars. New stories spread among merchants, wanderers, and explorers. Stories of a species not long known in the galaxy. They were not massive like the Varkan, not armored like insectoids, not gifted with psychic powers like others. Instead, they were human. At first, the Varkan laughed at the name. Humans. They sounded soft. They looked fragile. They had no claws, no armored skin, no wings, no poison. Yet strange reports followed. Humans surviving radiation storms. Humans climbing mountains with little more than rope. Humans walking across deserts that even machines failed to endure. The Varkan did not believe it. To them, survival was strength, and no species could match their own history of struggle. But fate, as always, had other plans. The station of many worlds, high above a neutral world, a great station hung in space. It was called Concordia Station, a place where many species came together to trade, speak, and settle disputes without bloodshed. Its halls were vast, its markets busy, and its chambers filled with voices in 100 languages. One cycle, the station was louder than ever. Rumors spread quickly. The Varkan were coming. It was rare for the Varkan to appear in such a place. They did not care for markets or speeches. They believed deals were decided by strength, not by words. Yet a delegation was indeed on its way, led by a warlord named Karvos. His arrival shook the station, for he was known across the stars as one of the mightiest Varkan alive. Crowds gathered. Station guards stood stiff, their hands near their weapons, though they knew it would mean little against Varkan force. Merchants whispered nervously. Scientists peeked from behind doors. Everyone wanted to see the giants. Karvos entered with his warriors. They were towering, their skin marked with scars. Their armor carved from beasts of Drethus Prime. Each step made the floor tremble. Their eyes scanned the halls as if searching for weakness in every creature around them. The air grew heavy with their presence, and then, on that same day, another group arrived. Humans. They came not in thunder, but in calm stride. Their leader was Captain Rena Holt, an explorer from Earth. She and her small crew had traveled the stars in search of knowledge, trade, and friendship. They had heard of the Varkan, but unlike the others, they did not hide when the giants entered. They walked into the same hall, their boots steady, their faces calm. The moment was electric. The strongest Deathworld species stood face to face with the new children of Earth. Eyes of fire and eyes of calm. Karvos was the first to speak. His voice rolled like storm clouds. "You are the humans," he said, his eyes narrowing. "The ones we hear about. The ones who claim survival without strength." Captain Holt met his gaze. She was not tall compared to him. She barely reached his chest. Yet her stance was unshaken. "We claim nothing," she replied. "We only live, as all do, but we live well." The hall was silent. Many species watched, waiting for Karvos to crush her with words or fists. But he only studied her, puzzled by her calmness. You do not fear us, Karvos growled. Why? Because fear does not help, Holt said simply. It only blinds the mind. The words struck the hall like a spark. Other species whispered to each other. No one spoke to the Varkan like this. The challenge the Varkan believed in testing all things. Words were not enough. To them, truth came from trial. Karvos stepped closer, his shadow falling over Holt. If you are as strong as you say, prove it, he rumbled. Fight me. The hall gasped. No one challenged a Varkan warlord. To fight him was to invite defeat. But Holt only shook her head. Strength is not only in fists. Let us test another way.
Avos frowned.
Another way? A battle of minds, Holt suggested. A strategy game. If strength is survival, then let us see who survives on the board. The Varkan laughed at first, their voices booming. To them, games were for children. But Karvos was curious. This human did not cower. He agreed. A table was brought, a board placed upon a tan-old galactic game of war. With tiles and pieces representing fleets and armies, the crowd pressed in, eager to watch. The duel of minds the game began. Karvos moved with confidence, placing his forces with power. He charged forward, attacking with overwhelming might. Holt, however, played differently. She watched. She waited. She sacrificed small pieces, drawing Karvos deeper into traps. Every move she made seemed weak, but each step guided him closer to danger. The Varkan warlord grew frustrated. His strategy was strength, but Holt's was patience. In time, her pieces surrounded his. His armies fell not to power, but to clever positioning. The final moment came when Holt's last fleet cut off his main force. Ending the game, the hall exploded with whispers. The human had won. Karvos stared at the board. Then at Holt. For the first time in many years, he had been defeated. Not in strength, but in something he did not fully understand. You are small, he said slowly. You are fragile. Yet, you think like a hunter, we think like survivors, Holt replied. Strength is more than muscle. It is also the mind, the will, and the bond between us. Karvos did not answer, but in his eyes, a new light burned, not anger, but curiosity. The first crack that night, the Varkan delegation remained silent in their quarters. Karvos sat alone, replaying the game in his mind. For the first time, he wondered if perhaps strength was not so simple. Outside, the humans walked calmly through the station, sharing food with strangers, laughing with species who once feared to approach them. Where the Varkan brought silence and tension, the humans brought warmth and ease, and the galaxy watched. The strongest Deathworld species had finally met humanity. The encounter had not ended in battle, but in something far stranger, a question. For the first time, the Varkan wondered if there was another kind of strength, one they had never known. The Varkan delegation did not leave Concordia Station after the duel. Many thought they would storm away, offended by defeat. Instead, they stayed. Karvos himself gave no order to depart. His warriors whispered among themselves, uneasy at the silence of their leader. Karvos was restless. For a lifetime, he had believed strength was clear, simple, and absolute. Whoever crushed the enemy was strongest. Yet the human woman had beaten him in a game that was more than plate, was battle in another form. It gnawed at him. Was strength only the fist? Or could it be something more? Uneasy curiosity. The next day, Karvos walked through the halls of Concordia Station. He wore no helmet, letting his scarred face show. Many creatures fled from his gaze. They always did, but then he turned a corner and found the humans again. Captain. Colt and her crew were seated at a crowded table in the market section. They were eating simple food and laughing together. Around them sat members of other species, small insectoids, feathered avians, even timid reptilians. None of those species would normally sit within reach of a Varkan warrior. Yet with the humans, they gathered closely, speaking freely. Karvos stopped. He stared at them. Holt noticed his shadow before she saw his face. She looked up calmly. Warlord Karvos, do you wish to join us? The table fell silent. Other species froze in fear, but Holt's voice was steady, almost casual. Karvos tilted his head. You offer me a seat after I sought to crush you? We offer seats to anyone who wishes to talk, Holt said. That the answer unsettled him more than the game. Strength he understood. Mercy he did not. The second test later, that cycle Karvos gathered his warriors. Humans speak well, he growled, but words can hide weakness. We will test them again this time with blood. His warriors nodded eagerly, but Karvos did not mean battle to the death. The station forbade such things. Instead, he arranged a challenge in the training halls, a trial of endurance. The rules were simple. Each challenger would endure tasks of pain and strain, holding weight, resisting heat, running distance. The last to stand would be declared stronger. When Holt's crew heard, they agreed to join. Not out of pride, but out of respect. Endurance, Holt said, is something humans know well. Trial of endurance, the training hall filled with spectators. Varkan warriors lined one side, their muscles gleaming beneath armor. Humans stood on the other, smaller, lighter, with no claws or thick hides. The first test began. Each challenger had to lift a stone block forged from dense metal. The Varkan lifted with ease, their arms swelling with power. The humans strained, but they too lifted less gracefully, but with stubborn effort. The second test came. Heat resistance. Flames roared from vents, and the challengers stood in the burning air. Varkan roared with pride, their skin steaming. Humans stood silently, sweating their lips dry, but they did not move. The third test was distance. They had to run across a long track again and again, while the watchers counted laps. The Varkan charged forward like beasts, fast and thunderous. The humans ran slower, but they kept going, step after step, breath after breath. Hours passed. One by one, Varkan began to drop, their great bodies overheating, their strength burning out. But the humans kept moving, their rhythm steady. Their secret was not bursts of power, but stubborn endurance. At last, only two remained, Karvos himself, and a human named Mason Reed. Mason was not a captain, not a leader, only a mechanic. A simple man of earth, but his will was iron. His legs shook. His chest heaved, yet he refused to stop. Karvos growled, pushing his body harder, refusing to yield. But even his mighty strength faltered under time's weight. Mason staggered past him one final time. Still moving forward when the warlord's knees struck the ground, the hall fell into stunned silence. The strongest warrior had been outlasted. The warlord's question Karvos rose slowly. His pride wounded, but his spirit burning. He approached Mason, towering over him. Why? Karvos demanded. Why did you not stop? Even when pain broke your body, why keep moving? Mason wiped the sweat from his brow. His voice was hoarse but steady. Because stopping means losing. Because we humans have learned that pain does not end us. If we keep moving, even when it hurts, we win in the end. The words struck deep. Varkan lived by strength of the moment, by victory in sudden strikes. Humans lived by persistence, by refusing to yield over time. It was another kind of power one Karvos had never considered. Reactions among the Varkan, opinions split. Some muttered angrily, calling the humans tricksters who used strange trials to shame them. Others stared in thoughtful silence. They had seen something no lie could explain. Humans did not quit among the other species of the station. Whispers grew louder. The humans are different, they said. Not the strongest, not the fastest, but something else. Something dangerous, because they never stop. Karvos heard those whispers too. For the first time in his long life, he felt doubt, not in his own strength, but in his understanding of what strength truly meant. A night of thought, that night. Karvos sat alone in the dark of his chamber. His armor lay beside him, his weapons across the wall. He remembered the feel of Drethus Prime's storms, the sound of predators screaming in the night. He remembered the trials that made him a warrior, the endless battles that defined his people. Strength had always meant crushing, surviving, dominating. Yet humans showed another path: endurance, cooperation, sacrifice. He clenched his fists. Could it be that strength was not one thing, but many? A warning while Carvos struggled with thought. Captain Holt and her crew shared a quiet meal together. But one of her officers, a young woman named Leah, spoke softly. "They don't like us," Leah said, glancing at the Varkin across the hall. "Some of them want us gone." Holt nodded. Change always brings fear. But fear is not the end. It is only the beginning. She looked toward the Varkan delegation. "They think we are strange, but they are watching. And when someone watches long enough, they start to learn." The spark the next morning, something unusual happened. One of the younger Varkan warriors, scarless and eager, approached Mason in the training hall. "You," the warrior growled. "Teach me how you kept running." Mason blinked in surprise. "Running?" "Yes," the warrior said. "Teach me how to endure." Mason smiled faintly. "It's simple. You don't think of the pain. You think of the next step, and then the next, until you reach the end." The warrior tried. He stumbled, fell, but rose again. Other Varkan laughed at him, but Mason only nodded. "Good. That's the first lesson." It's for the first time in history, a Varkana asked a human to teach, and the galaxy would never forget that moment. Closing of Part 2, the Varkan had tested humanity with muscle, fire, and exhaustion. They had expected humans to break. Instead, they discovered a truth as sharp as any blade. Humans were not strong because of size or power. They were strong because they endured, because they refused to stop. Carvos watched his young warrior train under Mason's quiet guidance. A storm raged inside him, a storm of pride and doubt. "The humans," he muttered to himself. "They are not what I thought, perhaps. They are something more." And with that thought, the path of his people began to change. Concordia Station had always been a place of voices, of trade, of quiet deals between worlds. But that peace ended when the alarm sounded. Red lights filled the halls. The voice of the station's central system echoed through every corridor, warning. Unidentified ships approaching. Defensive systems engaged. All civilians remain in secure zones. Panic spread quickly. Merchants closed their stalls. Children of alien species cried out, and station guards ran to their posts. Through the wide viewports, shapes moved in the dark of space, hundreds of metallic drones. Their wings sharp like knives, their eyes glowing with red light. They were not alive. They were machines of war, sent by an unknown hand. They came in swarms, endless and merciless. Their only purpose was destruction. First strike, the first drone struck the station's shields with blasts of energy. The shields flickered, groaned, but held. The second wave cut deeper. Metal shook. Sparks rained from the ceilings. Inside the halls, fear grew. Concordia had defenses, yes, but it had not been built for war on this scale. And yet, standing in the main docking bay, two groups did not run: the Varkan warriors, their blades humming with energy, and the humans, their rifles in hand. Carvos's eyes blazed with fury. So the cowards send machines instead of flesh? Good. Let them come. Captain Holt raised her weapon. Machines or flesh, they can still kill the innocent. We hold here. The two leaders stood side by side, the strongest Deathworld species and the new children of Earth, both ready for what came. The invasion, the first breach, came in Docking Bay 12. A swarm of drones tore through the airlocks, their metal claws cutting steel. The doors exploded inward, and the machines poured through like a black tide. The Varkan roared and charged. Their blades and claws smashed the machines, ripping them apart with raw power. One swing of Carvos's axe split 3 drones at once. Sparks flew as metal shattered under his strikes. The humans moved differently. They did not charge without thought. They spread out, covering each other's sides. Their rifles spat bursts of light, each shot placed with care. When one human paused to reload, another stepped forward to shield them. When a drone broke through, 2 humans dragged their comrade back. Keeping the line unbroken, the Varkan fought like storms. The humans fought like walls. For a moment, it seemed they might hold. But the swarm was endless. For every machine destroyed, 3 more appeared. A moment of sacrifice near the front. A young Varkan warrior was caught. A drone's claw pinned his arm. Another drove a blade toward his chest. He struggled, but even his strength could not break free. Then something unexpected happened. A human soldier, small compared to the giant, threw himself forward. He fired point blank, destroying the drone's eye. The blast took him down as well, his armor sparking. But the Varkan was free. The warrior stared in shock. No Varkan had ever seen such an act. To risk oneself for another? To save a comrade with no blood tie? It was unthinkable. Yet it was real. The human groaned, alive but wounded. The Varkan lifted him, carrying him back to safety. For the first time, he felt the weight of another life in his arms. It shook him more than any battle had. The turning point, the drones pressed harder. Station walls crumbled, flames burned. Holt shouted commands, her voice clear over the noise. Hold the line. Cover the wounded. Push them back. Her crew obeyed without hesitation. Even when outnumbered, even when afraid, they trusted each other. They trusted her. Karvas watched. His warriors fought with rage, but without unity. They roared and struck, each seeking glory, but often leaving their backs open. Several fell because no one stood beside them, but the humans. The humans never left anyone alone. Karvas's chest burned. He realized something. This was why they endured. This was why they survived. Not just because of muscle or cunning, but because they stood together. With a roar that shook the bay, Karvas raised his axe high. Varkan. Stand as the humans stand. Back to back. Guard your kin or fall as prey. The Varkan hesitated. It was not their way. But then another drone wave struck, and the humans formed a shield wall around them. The message was clear. One by one, the Varkan shifted, covering each other, defending instead of charging blindly. The change was small at first, but it grew. For the first time in their history, the strongest warriors of the galaxy fought not as individuals, but as a unit. The long battle, the fight stretched on. Hours passed like minutes. Drones poured through every breach, their red eyes glowing like endless stars. The humans grew tired, their arms heavy, but they fought on. The Varkan bled, their armor torn, but they roared with fury. Together, they began to push the swarm back. In the chaos, Holt and Karvas fought side by side. She gave quick orders. He crushed enemies with raw power. Where she was calm, he was fire. Where he was force, she was precision. Together, they were unstoppable. At one moment, a drone almost struck Holt from behind. Karvas's axe cut it in half before it touched her. You saved me, she said, surprised. He growled. You are part of the line. None fall while I stand. Victory's price finally, the last drone fell. The halls of the station were filled with smoke and broken metal. Sparks rained from shattered lights. The ground was littered with wreckage. The survivors stood in silence, their chests heaving. Many were wounded. Some humans lay on stretchers. Some Varkan held their bleeding arms. But the line had held. Concordia Station was safe for now. The other species crept from their hiding places, their eyes wide. They had seen something never before imagined. Humans and Varkan fighting together. Not as rivals, but as allies. Aftermath in, the quiet after the storm. Karvas approached Holt. His armor was scorched. His hands dripping oil from the machines he had crushed. His eyes burned with something new. You fight with fire, he said. But not the fire of rage. The fire of bond, Holt nodded. We fight for each other. That is our strength. Karvas stared at her for a long time. Then, slowly, he bowed his head, not in defeat. But in respect, perhaps, he said, the Varkan have more to learn than I thought. A seed of change that night, the wounded rested. Humans tended to Varkan cuts with careful hands. Varkan, in turn, stood guard at the doors, so no further threat could strike. One young Varkan warrior sat beside a human medic. Why do you fight for each other? He asked. Even the weak, even those who slow you down. The medic smiled tiredly. Because one day, we might be the weak ones, and someone will fight for us. The warrior thought about this, his chest heavy with questions he had never known to ask, and far across the station, Carvos looked out into the stars. For the first time, he wondered if true strength was not dominance, but unity. Not the crushing of the weak, but the lifting of them. It was a thought that would never leave him. Closing of part 3. The Varkan had seen human teamwork, human sacrifice, and human will in the fire of real battle. And though they would not admit it openly yet, they had been changed. For once, the strongest Deathworld species did not stand alone. They stood together. The battle at Concordia Station was over, but its echoes remained. The wreckage of broken drones still lay scattered across the docking bays. The walls were scorched, lights flickered, and the air smelled of burned metal. Yet for all the damage, the station still stood. And that was something no one expected. The survivors' humans, Varkan and many other species, moved through the ruined halls, helping the injured, repairing the broken systems, and watching the stars carefully in case another swarm returned. The fear had not vanished. But alongside it was something new: respect. Respect for those who had stood against the impossible swarm and lived. Respect for humans, and respect even more strangely for Varkan, who had chosen to fight beside them. Uneasy quiet, Captain Holt stood on the observation deck. Her uniform torn and burned in places, her face pale with exhaustion. She stared out into the stars, thinking of Earth, of the people she had sworn to protect. Carvos approached, heavy footsteps echoing on the deck. His armor was cracked, one shoulder scorched black, but his stance was as proud as ever. For a long moment, he said nothing. He only looked at her, his burning eyes filled with a strange storm of thought. Finally he asked, "Why?" Holt turned. "Why? What? Why do your kind fight this way?" Carvos growled. "You protect the weak. You shield the broken. You risk yourselves for those who give you no strength in return. It is madness." Holt let out a slow breath. She had known this question would come, because she said softly, "Strength is not only for yourself. It is for those who cannot stand yet. If we do not protect them, who will?" Carvos's brow furrowed. "But the weak slow the strong. They consume resources. They fall in battle and drag others with them. My people cast them aside. That is the law of survival." "And yet," Holt said, stepping closer, "how many Varkan fell in the battle because they stood alone? How many might still live if someone had shielded them for a single moment?" Carvos's jaw tightened. The memory of his fallen kin burned in his chest. The first out later that night, the survivors gathered in the main hall. Humans set up medical tents, bandaging wounds. The Varkan stood guard, their glowing eyes watching the corridors. But not all were at peace. Some Varkan murmured angrily. "This way is weakness," one growled. "We should not hide behind humans. We fight with tricks and formations," another sneered. "It is not real strength." Carvos silenced them with a roar. "Enough. Did you not see the battle? Did you not bleed beside them? Their way held when ours would have failed." The others lowered their eyes, but doubts still lingered in their hearts. Stories by firelight in the quiet hours. Holt sat with a group of her soldiers, and a few curious Varkan around a flickering heater. The humans spoke of Earth's blue oceans, its green forests, its cities that reached the skies. One soldier, a young woman named Riley, spoke of her grandmother. She could not walk in her last years, but every day we cared for her. She told us stories, gave us wisdom. She was not strong in body, but strong in spirit. We do not cast away our elders. We honor them, a Varkan warrior scoffed. What good is a spirit if the body cannot fight? Riley looked at him calmly. Because one day all bodies will fail, and when they do, it is the spirit that teaches us how to go on. The Varkan fell silent. He had never thought of it that way. Carvos's trial. Carvos could not sleep. The human words spun in his mind like storms. All his life, He had believed strength was dominance, the crushing of weakness. Yet now, doubts grew like cracks in stone. He remembered the human soldier who had saved one of his kin. Throwing himself into danger, he remembered Holt's calm voice in the chaos, soldiers moving as one. He walked the station alone, his claws clanging on the steel floors. Finally, he found himself outside the medical bay. Inside, wounded humans lay in beds, their comrades watching over them. And beside them, wounded Varkan, also tended by human hands. He saw a human medic adjusting the bandages of a huge Varkan. The giant could have crushed the medic with one hand. Yet the warrior sat still, humbled, as the small human worked. Karvos's chest tightened. It was a sight he could never have imagined. The confrontation later. Karvos found Holt again. "You change my people," he said, voice low. "Already, some of my warriors speak of fighting as the humans do. Already they question the old laws. Is that so terrible?" Holt asked. Karvos growled. "It is dangerous. The Varkan are feared because we do not bend, because we do not break. If we lose this, what are we?" Holt met his eyes. Maybe something greater. Her words struck him harder than any blade. Seeds among the warriors the next day, training drills began. Humans repaired their weapons, prepared defenses. Varkan sharpened their blades. But something had shifted. A young Varkan warrior, the same one saved by the human soldier, began copying human movements. He stood back to back with another, practicing covering angles. At first, the others mocked him, but slowly a few joined. When Holt passed by, she smiled faintly. When Karvos saw, he said nothing. His silence was enough to let it grow, the choice of strength that evening. Holt and Karvos stood once more at the observation deck. The stars burned bright, silent witnesses to their words. Karvos finally spoke what weighed on him. "All my life I believed strength was to stand alone, unbroken. But now I wonder. Perhaps true strength is not the lone mountain, but the chain of mountains, unyielding together." Holt nodded. "That is what we believe. Alone we fall. Together we rise." Karvos looked away, his claws tightening on the rail. Change was never easy. But the seed was planted. Closing of Part 4, and so. In the quiet after the storm, the strongest Deathworld species began to question itself. The Varkan, who had never bent, now bent their thoughts toward strange human ways. They were not yet changed. Many still clung to the old laws. But for the first time in their long history, cracks had formed in their armor of pride, and in those cracks, something new was growing, something stronger than dominance, something called unity. The stars around Concordia Station burned with cold light, silent and watchful. The wreckage of the drone swarm drifted in the void, broken metal reflecting like shards of glass. The battle was won, but everyone knew it was not the end. For if a swarm this large had come, then something, or someone, had sent it. Captain Rena Holt stood with Karvos on the command bridge. Staring at the tactical screen, reports from scouts painted a grim picture. Beyond the nearby nebula, sensors detected massive energy signatures. Not just another Waven, entire fleet. The war drones were not fighting alone. The hidden enemy Holt's science officer. Lieutenant Perez spoke quickly, his voice tense. "These signals, they don't match any known empire. Whoever built the drones, they've stayed hidden until now. But the scale this isn't just raiders. It's an organized force." Karvos's claws tightened on the railing. His golden eyes narrowed. "Then we face them head-on. Varkan do not cower." Holt shook her head. "No, not head-on. Not unless we want to die. We need strategy. We need unity." Karvos bristled at first, but then he remembered the last battle. He remembered the human soldier dragging a Varkan out of fire. He remembered his own warriors trying human formations. And for the first time, he did not reject the idea. "Then we fight together," he said slowly, as if testing the words. Holt gave a sharp nod. Together. Preparing for Wartha. Station turned into a hive of activity. Humans and Varkan worked side by side, something no one had thought possible only days ago. Human engineers upgraded Varkan armor with shield emitters. Varkan smiths reforged human blades with metals stronger than steel. Soldiers drilled together, learning new tactics. Human squads taught Varkan how to cover each other's backs. Varkan taught humans how to strike with devastating force. At first, there were mistakes. Humans moved too quickly for the larger Varkan. Varkan grew impatient with human caution. But slowly rhythm grew. Slowly, they began to trust each other. Even the young Varkan, who once mocked teamwork, now practiced side by side with humans. His deep voice mixing with their shouts. The fleet arrives when the enemy fleet emerged from the nebula. The stars seemed to vanish. Thousands of ships, each bristling with weapons, filled the void. At their center was a colossal vessel, black as shadow, surface crawling with more drones. A voice broadcast across all channels, cold and mechanical. We are the architects. All life must be reshaped into order. Resistance is chaos. Chaos will be purged. The word sent chills through the hall. The architects were no empire of flesh. They were machines. An ancient intelligence hidden for centuries, now rising again. The hall went silent. Then Karvas growled. Let them come. The Varkan will show them chaos. Holt smiled grimly. And humanity will show them unity. The battle begins. The fleets clashed in a storm of fire. Drones poured from the architect's ships like swarms of insects, filling the void with glowing trails. Human ships weaved in tight formations, covering each other with precise fire. Varkan warships charged like predators, tearing through enemy lines with brutal force. For the first time, both fought as one. Humans shielded Varkan ships from long-range fire, while Varkan ships smashed through the enemy to open paths for human fleets inside the station. Ground forces fought boarding drones. Humans moved in squads, Varkan in heavy packs, their roars echoing through the halls. The sound of both together was unlike anything the galaxy had ever heard. Karvas's moment in the heart of the battle. Karvas led a strike team. Beside him fought Captain Holt, her rifle blazing. Around them, humans and Varkan fought shoulder to shoulder. The architects unleashed a new horror, massive war mechs. Towering machines with claws of plasma. One crashed into the bay where Karvas's team stood. The Varkan roared and charged, but the mech's claw swung, ready to crush them. In that instant, Karvas saw a human soldier leap forward, shoving a wounded Varkan out of the way. The human fell under the shadow of the claw. Karvas did not think. He moved. With all his strength, he slammed into the mech's arm, taking the blow across his own body. Armor cracked, blood spilled, but he stood. His roar shook the bay. The soldiers around him froze in awe. A Varkan who once believed only the strong deserved to live had thrown himself into harm's way to protect another. Holt's eyes widened, but then she smiled fiercely. Now you understand. Karvas bared his teeth. Yes. Strength shared is strength doubled. Turning the tide inspired, the Varkan fought differently. They began to shield their comrades, moving as pairs, roaring not only for themselves but for their allies. Humans, in turn, fought with renewed courage, trusting their massive allies to protect them. Together, they brought down the mech. Together, they pushed the drones back. On the bridge, Perez shouted, "The Architect's flagship is weakening. If we strike now, we can break them." Holt turned to Karvas. Then let's finish this. Together. The final Strike-A joint squadron of human and Varkan ships cut through the chaos, piercing the enemy line. Holt's flagship, the Valiant, led the charge. Beside it, Karvas's warcruiser roared forward. Weapons blazing, the Architects unleashed their defenses, but the joint fleet pressed on. Human precision fire tore holes in the flagship's shields. Varkan ships rammed into the gaps, smashing through. At last they reached the core. Holt gave the command, and Karvas roared his battle cry. Their combined fleets unleashed everything: torpedoes, beams, and claws of metal. The flagship shuddered. Then, with a blinding flash, it exploded. Tearing through the swarm, the remaining drones, leaderless, scattered, and fell silent. The architects were broken. Aftermath, a battlefield grew quiet. Debris drifted across the void, glowing faintly in the starlight. Concordia Station still stood, scarred but alive. Cheers rose through the halls. Humans embraced. Varkan roared. And then, in a moment, no one would forget. Both species raised their voices together. The new oath later, in the great hall, Karvas stood before his warriors. He looked at Holt, then at his kin. Once we believed strength meant standing alone. But today I tell you this, the Varkan are strong, but with humanity, we are stronger still. From this day, our people are bound, not by chains, not by fear, but by choice. Holt stepped forward, and humanity accepts. Together, we will not just survive. We will transform the galaxy. The hall erupted in thunderous cheers and roars. The strongest Deathworld species had not been conquered, they had been changed. And in turn, they would change the galaxy forever. Closing of the saga. Far beyond Concordia, whispers spread. Species who once feared the Varkan now saw them fighting beside humans. The galaxy watched in awe as predators became protectors, as warriors became allies, and in the center of it all was the truth humanity had carried from Earth. That strength is not in standing alone, but in standing together. The Varkan had been the strongest, but with humanity. They had learned a strength greater than any they had ever known, and so the legend began. Of the day the fiercest predators of the galaxy met humanity and were transformed forever.